Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplanty Goodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion, which you might be able to see around me, it's tropical houseplants. So today, I want to talk about something different. I want to talk about fertilizer, because I get a lot of questions from a lot of my followers on Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, the link is down in the description below, do join along. I do some short informational reels, and also give updates on some of my larger, more specimen plants. And from followers on Instagram and also from subscribers here, when we talk about what's needed with fertilizing, how often, all of these things. So I thought today I would dedicate this specific video to fertilizer information. So let me pick up my usual fertilizer, and for people who've been here for a long time, you know that I swear by liquid gold leaf, and this is something that I know you can buy in the UK. I think they will ship internationally. They can be quite expensive in terms of shipping internationally for the shipping cost, not the product itself. So it might be worth you kind of getting together with a few friends and just doing a larger batch order from them essentially. But I'm not going to talk about liquid gold leaf specifically this time. I'm just going to talk generally. So the thing that you always need to be thinking about when you're looking at fertilizers is actually, firstly, before we even dive into that, does your plant need fertilizer is something that you probably need to be considering first. Certain types of plants, and I'll give an example, a very specific example, most carnivorous plants do not need to be fertilized through the soil, basically. So I know there's some people that might fertilize foliar through the foliage, essentially, of the carnivorous plants, or maybe even try to add in some dead flies and things like that into your carnivorous plants. Please do not put burgers or human food into anything like a carnivorous plant. It will kill it quite quickly. It's not what it's meant to eat. So that won't work. But generally, with most carnivorous plants, just let them get on with it. You don't need to fertilize them. They will catch their own prey. They're quite good at doing it. And they also don't need an awful lot of fertilization all the time. So that's one thing. The other thing is, have a check and look online at signs of whether you're over fertilizing as well. So that's something else that you need to be looking at. There are certain telltale signs within the leaf. I've not had an awful lot of it with some of my plants, so I don't have examples that I can give you. But if you do a quick Google search and look at something like signs of fertilizing on leaves, you might be able to start seeing certain things to look out for on the foliage of your plant if you think you might be over fertilizing. And the easy solution when it comes to over fertilizing, let's dive into that, is you don't necessarily need to change your fertilizer. You just need to change the amount of your fertilizer. So a lot of the times, as a rule of thumb, what I will tend to do with most fertilizers is look at what it says on the side of the bottle and then just cut it by half, or even cut it down to a quarter, especially if it's something like wintertime, and make a weaker nutrition solution essentially for those plants. And then that at least kind of pulls it back down a bit. The fertilizer might be a bit weaker when it's going into the plants, so it's less likely to cause any issues with over fertilizing. And then eventually you can start upping or lowering those doses based on what you're seeing your plants react to. And like I always say, it's based on your environment, and it's based on your plants within your environment as well. So what might work for somebody might not work for you, and vice versa. But definitely do some experimentation. But maybe as a starting point, start with a half strength or even a quarter strength and build from there, essentially. The other thing that you need to remember when it comes to fertilizing is what I just mentioned a moment ago, the difference between summer and winter. And I know a lot of people will always kind of champion the don't fertilize at all during winter and pull back entirely and only start fertilizing again during the growing season. I don't always subscribe to the same mentality, and actually I generally don't subscribe to that mentality. Personal choice. Again, you might be different, and that's absolutely fine. We can have two different ways of growing plants, but I'm under the assumption that if my plants are still actively growing, so they're still growing taller and they're getting more foliage, even if it is slower, I will still fertilize, but what I will do is probably make it less frequent than I would be doing during the growing season. So if I'm fertilizing every second watering in the growing season, I might do it every fourth watering in the winter months. And I will also cut down the amount of fertilizer. So if I'm doing half strength fertilizer, maybe in the winter I'll do quarter strength fertilizer and then up it again in spring. So choose what you want to do essentially with that one. But generally I fertilize even in the winter as long as I'm seeing active growth. And that's why my plants generally, at least in my opinion, can still be growing even in the winter months. I don't generally have a lot of the plants that people are used to in terms of thinking, I'm looking at an alocasia now, alocasias or even some colocasias. My colocasia is still growing strong at the moment and it really should be going into dormancy. I've got a caladium that's still going strong that should really be in dormancy at the moment. But you can still keep some of these plants going, and guess what happens, especially with something like an alocasia, if you've still kept it growing to a certain point throughout the winter, you will be starting off in the growing season with an even bigger plant, so it will get even bigger basically. So something to consider. But back to what you need to be looking for, at least in my opinion, in most houseplant fertilizers. One of the things that you might want to consider, and again, this is a personal choice, is whether or not you want to go down the organic fertilizer route or whether or not you want to go down the non-organic fertilizer route. And there's pros and cons for both of those, but they tend to be more on a personal level in terms of what you want to be putting into your plants. What I have found a lot of the times with the organic fertilizers, the strength of the nutrients in the fertilizer is a bit weaker. So maybe with some of the more organic fertilizers, you don't have to reduce the amount that you put in or adjust to say half. You can do 2/3 or something like that, because the available nutrients within the organic fertilizers tend to be at a lower level anyway. But again, have a look. The other thing that's really important, and you keep seeing me pointing to the side of the bottle, know and check what your NPK value is. And your NPK value is the percentage of the nutrients that are within the fertilizer itself, and essentially what it stands for, and I'm looking at this just so I can remember, N is for nitrogen, P is for phosphorus, and K is for potassium. And that links back into their chemical symbols, especially if anybody remembers doing the periodic table at chemistry. Oh my God, I'm geeking out so much. I used to love doing chemistry. But that's where it comes from. That's where those values come from. And you can see the different percentages. And essentially, just as a bit of a rule of thumb, nitrogen, if it's higher in nitrogen than some of the other values, then it means that it's more geared towards promoting foliar growth, so more leaves on the plant. So a lot of our own ornamental plants that you're mainly growing for their leaves, you'd want maybe something that has a higher nitrogen level. And then phosphorus is what helps promote blooming. So for instance, I'm thinking now about things like a Hoya, things like hibiscus. I'm trying to think what else might flower quite frequently in the house plant world. So Hoyas, hibiscus, maybe a stephanotis as well. Orchids, that's the one. Orchids. So if you're seeing that a plant is getting close to blooming, or if you want to promote blooms a bit more, as long as it's the right time of the year for the blooms to happen, maybe fertilize with a fertilizer that's got a higher phosphorus number, because it will help promote those blooms and it will help those blooms stay on the plant for longer, basically, because essentially that's what blooms need. They need a higher phosphorus level. And the last one is obviously potassium, and potassium is a bit more of an all-rounder. Essentially, it helps strengthen the plants against pests and disease, which is always a good thing to have. So these are the three really key parts that you need to be looking at on your fertilizer. Now, if you're worried about and you don't know which one you want to have more of, the nitrogen, the potassium, the phosphorus, just go for what a lot of people call a balanced fertilizer. And essentially what you might then see is the NPK values will be the same for all three of those chemicals, essentially. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The other thing as well, and this is why I do like using liquid gold leaf, and I know some other fertilizers will do the same thing, so maybe do some of your own research. Liquid gold leaf also has some of the micronutrients. So it's got, I'm looking at it just because I need to remind myself now, it's got iron, it's got zinc, it's got manganese, it's got boron, it's got copper, and it's got molybdenum. I don't know what that last one is, but these are all micronutrients that aren't necessarily necessary. So for instance, if your fertilizer doesn't have these, it could be okay. You might still need to supplement with some of these things, like for instance, the iron, the manganese, the copper and the zinc at different times, because sometimes the lack of these might cause a bit of distress to the plant, or it might be not as well adept to dealing with its environment. but it's not necessary by any stretch of the imagination. These are micronutrients. So if you can find a fertilizer that will also have micronutrients, or if you can find a different fertilizer that's just the micronutrients, you can bring that into your rotation of fertilizing if you want to be a bit extra, essentially. And I am a bit extra generally. So that's something that you might want to consider there as well. There is other things that you need to also consider when it comes to fertilizing. Is most fertilizers will be in liquid form, and you'd put them through in the water and water your plants that way. The thing to remember about that as well, and this is something that a lot of people aren't always aware of, is it's always best to fertilize when the soil is already wet. So ideally, you'd be fertilizing a day or two after you've watered a plant, and not fertilizing a plant that has got a fully dry growing media, like the soil is fully dry and then you're putting the fertilizer through, because then sometimes it can lead to fertilizer burn on the leaves, because essentially those roots are dry and they're pulling in the fertilizer quite quickly because they're sucking up all the water to kind of reabsorb the moisture that's been lost from the soil. So just bear that in mind. Just be a bit more cognizant with when you're fertilizing. It's always a good idea to fertilize after something has been watered, essentially, just because you can avoid fertilizer burn. And I think that's everything I want to talk about in terms of fertilizer for right now. I'll recap really quickly on the difference between the NPK value and the micronutrients, because I think that might be the one thing that some people will be like, well, what's the real difference? Is if you think about nutrition in humans, your NPK value would be things like your carbohydrates, your fats, your proteins, and things like that. It's the things that you need anyway in your stable diet to kind of keep you living, essentially. And the micronutrients would be something like adding vitamins or multivitamins, or taking something like a vitamin C. It's not necessary, but if you do that on there, it gives you maybe a bit of an edge, essentially. So maybe that's a good way of thinking about the difference between the NPK nutrients and the micronutrients. But yeah, I think that's everything I wanted to talk about when it comes to fertilizer today. If you think I've missed anything, if you wanted to share any of your experiences down below, please do. I'd love to have that conversation with you. And maybe, because I know I've got subscribers from all over the world, maybe share down below what your favorite fertilizer is where you're based. Because if there's other people that are looking at the comments and having that conversation, you might help them discover a fertilizer that they've maybe not have heard of before. And essentially, let's share the knowledge and let's share the love. But yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.